Well, hello. So glad we have the opportunity to continue our study of the miracles of Jesus. We got the opportunity earlier to look at this miracle that really leads to the understanding of the disciples. We got to look at the blind man at Bethsaida and how that really led into Peter's great confession that you are the Messiah. And that's a really big turning point in the Gospels, particularly in Mark, because up until this point, the disciples have sometimes had glimpses. Right at the beginning of John, Andrew identifies Jesus as the Messiah. We sometimes get them to understand the idea that he is the Son of God, but the overwhelming idea is that the disciples are confused, that they're not fully aware. And most often they seem to kind of fall back on the idea that he's a teacher, that he's their rabbi, that maybe he has a prophetic power of some sort. But this statement that he is the Messiah, that's a big transformation. It's kind of this make or break moment. Jesus asks him, okay, who do you say that I am? Kind of demanding the answer. He gives the answer. But it's clear that they still don't fully understand what that means, because Messiah for the disciples, that's the idea of a national Messiah. That's the idea that Jesus is going to come. He's going to restore the throne of Israel. He's going to restore the people back to a place of prominence, and he's going to come rebuild the kingdom. He's going to be David's heir in the flesh. Well, Jesus turns that completely on its head, and he then begins to proclaim to them how he is going to die and be raised on the third day. And Peter's reaction, who Matthew has just proclaimed to be the rock, he's the leader of this group, he immediately goes and he's like, no, you can't do that, Jesus. Heaven forbid that you should do that. And Jesus has to rebuke him. Get behind me, Satan. You still don't understand. And so that continues then, that Jesus then begins to discuss, not just with the apostles, but with this larger crowd of disciples, to define for them what discipleship truly means, what it truly means to follow after Jesus. And he says this in verse 34 of Mark chapter 8. He says, he summoned the multitude with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel shall save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of the Father with the holy angels. And he was saying to them, truly, truly, I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who shall not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. So he wants to make it clear that this Messiah and the followers of the Messiah, it's not about a physical kingdom. It's not about rebuilding Israel. It's a bigger deal than that. It's the idea of sacrifice. It's the idea of giving up oneself, of looking out for the betterment of others. And again, we've seen Jesus has been teaching these things, but again, the disciples are slow to understand. They're slow to hear what's being told them. Well, now, today, we're going to look at a miracle that removes all sheds of doubt. When Mark's gospel started, he described this as the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Messiah and the Son of God. So it's been made clear for us that he's the Messiah. It's been made clear to the disciples that he's the Messiah, and there's no more debating that. Well, now we're going to have it made clear for us and made clear for the disciples that he is the Son of God. And so in chapter 9 and verse 2, in a passage that is rich with Old Testament connections, it says on chapter 9 and verse 2, and 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His garments became radiant and exceedingly white, as no launderer on earth can whiten them. And Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter answered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to answer, for they became terrified. Then a cloud formed, overshadowing them, and a voice came out of the cloud, This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And all at once they looked around and saw no one with them anymore, except Jesus alone. And as they were coming down from the mountain, he gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man should rise from the dead. So we have here an indisputable display of exactly who Jesus is. But notice some of the terminology that's being used here. On the sixth day, on the idea of the culmination, the completion, the last day of creation, the Son of Man. Man is now coming up to the mountain. And we see that idea really kind of paralleling Moses's coming up to the mountain, to Sinai, this high mountain. High mountains, they're always affiliated with the idea of being closer to God, of being closer to the heavenly realm. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to receive his revelation from God. Elijah goes up on Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, and he goes up to the high mountain to receive his direct revelation from God when he's fleeing from Jezebel. And so we're seeing the connections, and we're prepared to say, hold on, wait a second, this is where men go to see God. And now Jesus comes up, and he's transfigured. And it's really a transliterated word, the idea of metamorpho. It's this transformation, and it's about the idea of not so much change of, he goes from a man to a beast, but a fuller revelation of who he is. His divine self, his deity is shining fully through who he is. And in that idea of the shining, of the radiance, we're reminded of Moses, that when Moses went to God, his face became more like the Lord's. It became radiant, so much so that he had to wear a veil over it. And so we then see that Moses and Elijah appear. And Moses and Elijah, in a lot of ways, kind of represent the messianic foreshadowings. They represent the law, as Moses, the great lawgiver, and as the prophets, Elijah being kind of the general normative idea of a prophet. And so for these two figures to show, it's pointing us, it's connecting us that this Jesus is who the law and the prophets were all foreshadowing. This is the man, this is the one, not just where his face will shine, but all of him will be shine. He will not be out in the wilderness in garments of hair. He will be on the top of the mountain in garments of gleaming white, unable to be made so by human laundry. And what does Peter do in the face of all of this? Peter does, and I don't want to badmouth Peter here, Peter does what we probably would all do. Peter freaks out. He just starts babbling incoherently. That's what it says. It says they did not know what to answer, for they become terrified. Of course they're terrified. They're on the top of a mountain. Jesus has become this dazzling white, gleaming person. He's talking to Moses and Elijah, two people who have been dead for a long time and are all of a sudden here, the national heroes of Israel. Of course Peter's freaking out. And so he just starts babbling, just starts saying things, whatever's on the top of his mind. But notice what he says. He says, it's good for us to be here. Let us make you 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And I think sometimes this is misconstrued as Peter saying, let's build an altar. More than likely what this is this is in reference to kind of a tent. In other words, almost like a dwelling place. And so let's make something that you all can stay here and you can be around us and everything. But you notice how he's equating Moses and Elijah and Jesus? They've already been revealed. Peter has said, you're the Messiah. But they still view Jesus on that earthly level. And so almost the parallel for me, and maybe this is not the best parallel, but it's what I think of. This is the visual that I get. In the Disney movie Hercules, when Hercules goes to the famed trainer Philoctetes, the little man goat played by Danny DeVito, he tells him, like, hey, I'm the son of Zeus, and I'm here to be a hero. And Phil just starts cracking up. He's like, oh, you're the son of Zeus, the big guy up in heaven. And so he starts to sing his song, as Disney movies go. And he's like, I've seen all this. I've done all this. I've got 2 words for you. And he's going to say, no way. And then all of a sudden, the lightning bolt from Zeus strikes him. And he goes, okay. And it's that thunderous reveal of, in the movie that, Zeus making like, hey, let me make something clear. That is my son, and you do what you're supposed to be doing. And that's actually kind of in a much bigger and more grandiose and more important way. That's what God does right here. Peter, in the midst of his babbling, in the midst of like, hey, like let's make some tents for you. Let's let you stay here. The voice of God thunders out from the mountain, just like it did at Mount Sinai for Israel, just like it did in the quiet voice for Elijah on Mount Horeb. It thunders out, this is my beloved son. Listen to him. It's almost like God the Father goes, enough. Enough. He's not a prophet. He's not a lawgiver. He's not a teacher. He's my son. Listen to what he's saying. And now it's like, click. Oh, that's what it means to be the Son of God. He's literally divine. He is literally Yahweh in the flesh. And so he has now come, and now the disciples in this earth-shattering moment of, oh, that's who Jesus is. He's the Messiah, but now how we've thought of the Messiah. And Jesus then, as they're going down the mountain, again, kind of echoing that idea of Moses now coming down to tell the nation of Israel the truth of God, it says that he told them, do not tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man should rise from the dead. And so now we've had twice now, intricately linked with the confession of who Jesus is, both as Messiah and as the Son of God, that the Son of Man will die, but he will be raised from the dead. And to continue the theme, because it hasn't quite ended yet, of the disciples being utterly confused, they were coming down the mountain and they seized upon that statement, the rise from the dead, discussing with one another what rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, saying, why is it that the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And he said to them, Elijah does first come and restore all things. And yet how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah himself indeed has come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as it was written of him. The disciples are still trying to wrap all this up. They're trying to figure out, okay, what does he mean by he's going to die? Because they still see him as a physical Messiah. Even after all of this, they're still thinking the physical. They're like, now hold on a second. Okay. Now the scribes say Elijah's got to come first. Well, was that Elijah coming? He didn't really come. We saw him really quickly, but, he's not back. So, has Jesus come in his full power? Maybe he's going to die and then he'll come back and then he'll be the Messiah? And Jesus is like, stop. Elijah's been here. Like, you met him. It was John. Again, that whole point has been made multiple times. Listen to what I'm telling you. They mistreated John. They killed Elijah reborn. They got rid of him. Why are you surprised by what I'm saying, that the Son of Man is going to suffer? That's exactly what Isaiah said was going to happen to the servant. And so we see Jesus continuing to try to get them to see and understand what it means for the Messiah. And so we're now getting in the point of the Gospels where this tension, it's becoming tighter and tighter, because we know we're getting closer and closer to the ends of the books. And we as readers know what's going to happen. We know that what Jesus has said is true, that he is going to die, that he is going to be on the cross. And so we're seeing this tension of, okay, how is this all going to work out? These disciples aren't ready. They're not prepared to be the leaders they need the church to be. How is Christ going to get them there? And that's where this story continues to build as we continue to see Jesus' ministry made more and more clear of who he is and what he's come to do. The Son of Man has come to die for the sake of mankind. And that's the story that we're going to continue to unfold over these kind of second half of these gospel stories. Thank you so much for taking the time to study through these things. The Transfiguration is an incredible, incredible story, and it's one of those, it's probably one of the top 5 things that you'd love to see, or maybe not love to see given the reaction of the disciples. But it's one of those things that must have just been awe-inspiring to have seen. What's amazing for us, though, is that we're promised to see the transformed Christ. That someday soon, when the Lord returns, and when we who are his people are gathered up to him, we're going to see him in that glory. We're going to see face to face the resurrected Savior. And so while we can read about the Transfiguration now, there's coming a day where we won't have to read about it. We'll see it with our own eyes. And that's part of the reason these miracles are being recorded for us, is so that we have faith that that Son of God is who we serve today and who we are going to see soon and very soon. Thank you so much for taking the time to study these things with us. We love you guys. We continue to pray for you, and we hope that you continue to study these things with us. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.